Nice to be in full springtime mode here. It's May 17th, 2023. This is the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council. We'll call the meeting to order. And is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Windshuttle.
All right, we got a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Anderson and Windshuttle. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next, public invitation. Anybody here from the public that wishes to comment on a matter of importance to them relative to the tab? Okay, I'm not hearing anything or seeing anybody coming forward. Let's move on to chair's reports, or the various reports, including chair agency reports, and then we hear from Jeni Hager too on a brief TAC report. We didn't have an executive committee meeting this month, but nonetheless, I was on a meeting on the 8th of May that I thought was interesting to share some information with all of you. It was a U.S. Conference of Mayors related meeting on the role of transit run by the Vice Chair of Transportation, who is on the Standing Committee on Transportation with me, a guy named Mayor Travis Stovall from Oregon. The first speaker was a guy named Nick Bloom, who's a researcher at Stanford, and his topic was transit and another new acronym for us to all pick up, work from home, WFH, the new deal, WFH. So he said pre-COVID that 5% of the people were working from home that were in the workforce. Now U.S. Full days work from home is up to about 30%. People working from home. But when he looks at the different groups over time, since COVID, the people that are fully on site now at an office building is at 60%. Hybrid work coming in 2-3 days a week to the office, 28.8%. Fully WFH, 11.5%, which is up significantly. And it's up the most in the large cities and college towns. He said there were 5 impacts on the economy that he had observed from the research that they'd done. Specifically, the first one was with location. With respect to location, almost 1 million people have left big city centers and are not coming back. And that is because of the ability that we have through the technology that we have that we're living with now. Also, shifting retail spending is going from big cities into suburbs. And many of you may see that as an effect that are in the suburbs or in the cities. Rents and home values have surged in the suburbs. Public transit journeys have plummeted nationwide by about 30%, and that's the same kind of data we're seeing here. A lot of outsourcing of IT. And then the last one he had, the fifth impact was, he said, golf has increased by 52% since 2019, almost all of it during the weekday. The weekends used to be the big push for golf. Now it's the weekday. So people are working from home and going golfing and doing other things apparently. There's a 178% increase in daytime activities at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is pretty remarkable. And he said the longer run technology will continue to build work from home momentum. So, it looks like the struggle with how to fill an office building will continue. The summary he had was work from home is here to stay and likely to build, and large cities are going to continue to see a reduction in density at the city core. So those ideas that are being bandied about that we've heard about, one was converting office space into residential. We've heard some discussion of that in Minneapolis. The next speaker was was a former Seattle transit person, and he talked about what is a competitor for transit. Well, the answer is it's a single occupant vehicle, and of course we all know that vehicle miles travel equates to has a direct correlation to CO2 production. In Denver, in Minneapolis, increase in vehicle miles traveled is way up. Car trip times are increasing, and people are making increasingly longer trips. And then we also had on a guy in the call named Richard Florida. I'm sure many of you have heard of him or maybe read some of his books. Wrote that book years ago, The Creative Class. And he's been looking at how pandemics affect cities. And his assertion was that pandemics are accelerating trends that were already underway, and that they have not altered the arc of urbanization. That will morph and it'll be different to city, but it'll not go away. He said the office concept is a broken concept. The office tower is the last vestige of the industrial age, which was an interesting observation, I thought. And the creative class, he said, actually gave the office towers their last gasp. So to the point that what the pandemic did was accelerate something that was going to be happening anyway. Entertainment, culture, health, what people want is changing. 65% want park space, 50% want cultural access. And so those are some of the kind of the key things that were set forth as data points in that meeting. I thought it was all interesting stuff and interesting for all of you to hear it. Because that main competitor that we have, as we think about this massive investment we have in our transit system, and our main competitor is a single occupant vehicle, how are we going to compete? And we better start thinking about that as we're doing this work here, because there's a lot of work to be done. So that's it for my chair's report. I'm going to turn now to Mike Barnes for our first agency report from MnDOT.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the information. It was very, very interesting. Just a quick update since our last meeting. There was the Metro TZD workshop that I mentioned last month. Was held last week. There was over 100 attendees. It was a celebrate. It's a yearly meeting, kind of a workshop to gain momentum again, to bring everybody, all the E's together, to be able to share and kind of get that energy going for the next year. But it's also to celebrate that it's been 20 years for here in Minnesota for the TZD efforts. And it's definitely has made a difference in saving a lot of lives over the years and continuing to find different things. But with that said, is there's still, to date from this year is 88 fatalities across the state from our last report. And of that, 28 are in the metro. So you can see we're still a big chunk of that, which though is lower from the metro side. The 3-year average is 36, so maybe in the 28 we're 22% less, which is good, but that means there's 28 more deaths here in the metro than what we want. So with that, there's more work to do with that, and I know in here there's lots of discussion on safety and all the different options. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's all I have, unless there's questions on anything.
Prompt any questions from members for Member Barnes? All right, I'm looking around the room. I don't see anybody from MPCA here today. So we'll pass over MPCA and go right to the MAC. Member Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a lot. I know there's somebody on the agenda from the MAC for later on. So I just want to make a few points. The seats, airline seats are up 15% over last year. And they're at the 90% of the pre-pandemic level. So we're still increasing. Nonstop flights are up. The routes for nonstop flights are at 95% of the 2019 level. And we have 22 new domestic routes that have started. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, the St. Paul Airport, the flood wall has been taken down. It wasn't up 100%. It was up about 75% of its height, but they've now removed it with the water receding. So the airport's back into standard business. The runways are at their standard length. So it seems like in this area, the flooding has ceased or slowed down. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, good. Thank you, Member Crimmins. Any questions for Member Crimmins related to the airport operation?
Can I ask a question? So we're having flooding in Scott County because of all the rain last weekend. Is any of that coming that way?
No, we haven't seen it here. That was mostly in the south.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to, yeah.
Down by us.
Up here, we got I think the airport registered like 0.75 of an inch of rain. You had about 7 inches or something.
Comes from out west, comes through there, doesn't it? I don't know. No, I don't know.
It comes down to Mississippi, but
Okay.
By Hastings.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I noticed that Ed Bastian from Delta was on CBS Morning News this morning, and he said that they've already filled out 75% of their schedule for Europe for the summer. So people are traveling, moving around.
Yeah, and
staying
they
in
opened up
hotels.
that Haneda Airport in Japan. That's the one that's really close to Tokyo. You don't have to fly and take a bus for 40 minutes to get to Tokyo now. That was the last overseas flight that Delta had to get approved, and that's open now. So now they're flying into Haneda in Tokyo.
Good, thanks for that. Somebody have a question?
Peter?
Oh,
Mr.
yes,
Chair, thank
Member
you.
Dugan.
Yes, I've had the opportunity to fly quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, and I want to compliment Mac and you and your fellow commissioners. You go to other airports and you realize what you've got at home, and it's hasn't surpassed anything I've seen. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Staff does a great job.
And as well as you and your fellow commissioners.
Member Barber.
Yep, nope. Oh, are you ready for my report?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you were calling on me for a question.
Sorry to startle you with,
That's all right.
without forewarning you.
No, I am good to go. So a couple of things. So last week we were able to celebrate the groundbreaking for the B line. The B line will substantially replace Route 21, which is the state's busiest local bus route and serves, really travels from St. Paul to Minneapolis. It was a great opportunity to celebrate with many of our project partners. We were joined by Senator Tina Smith and Congresswoman Omar and the mayors of both cities because they both know what an important project is for the region. It's really the route, in my mind, that starts to connect all of the other routes together. So when we keep talking about this built-out system, this is really, really a significant part of it. And right now, we're looking at construction completing and the line being operational in 2024. Also want to highlight a couple of tours that we had recently. So we had the APTA Mobility Conference here a couple of weeks ago, and we had opportunity to go through some of our projects with representatives from the FTA. One was a tour with District 5 Administrator Kelly Brookins, where we did a pretty thorough tour of the Green Line and with a number of their staff, so a lot of the people who work with our staff day to day on that project. And then we were also able to do a tour of both the blue and the green lines and we're joined by the FTA Deputy Administrator Veronica Vanderpool and Executive Director Matt Welbus. It was a really good opportunity to show the project, but also I think to show the cooperation. In fact, what we heard from a lot of the leadership at FTA was that they were really impressed at the regional kind of collaboration, the interplay and interactions between the cities and the counties and the council, and really happy to see that because they don't see that in every region. And when I think of the work that we do here, it's really important to let you guys all know that that really does get recognized, that collaborative effort is being seen on a national level. And also definitely want to thank the Deputy Administrator for taking the time out to have a very busy week to spend the afternoon with us and see these important projects. Lastly, the council hosted workshops on May 11th, and we'll have another one tomorrow to discuss priorities for goals and objectives for the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan development. This is the follow-up, that is the work from the listening sessions that were conducted in February, March, and which many of you attended. The workshops include a survey to evaluate potential goal statements to help inform initial drafts, which we expect to have sometime in June. We have over 80 registered participants from various governments and non-government organizations signed up for these workshops. The most important aspect of the engagement is the survey, and you all should have received an email from Elaine with a link to the survey. It'll take about 15 minutes to fill out, and we're asking people to complete it by Tuesday, May 23rd. If you can follow up with Elaine if you've got any questions, and she'll connect you with the right staff, but I'd really appreciate if you take the time because all of that input is really helping us as we develop the plan.
Thank you, Member Barber. Any questions for Member Barber at this point in time? Yes.
I just put a plug for the survey because that's exactly the kind of thing you were talking about from your notes from your conference, is how transit demand is changing, and this is how Metro Transit's going to be, thinking forward about those trends. So I think it's great.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I'll put another plug forward. There's another survey, which I think is the Network Now survey, which is really how we revisit our transit system. So both of those are live. Definitely do Network Now as well. So I think that's helpful.
I think what, you know, those transit advantages that we all think about, the convenience, the cost, the comfort, time in some circumstances are things that we need to be thinking about exploiting if we're going to be competitive with that single occupant vehicle. Member
Yeah,
Barber.
and Mr. Chair, just in alluding to your earlier comments of people traveling at different times of day and things like that, that is definitely what we're seeing in our transit system on our local routes and our ABRTs. So these ABRTs that function so frequently are really conducive to those types of rides. So the D line opened in December, and we've already had 1 million rides. And so it's highly used, and it's highly used all throughout the day, not just at peak hours. And so, you know, again, thank you to TAB for helping to support the build-out of the ABRT system.
Okay, Member Geisler.
Mr. I just wanted to add a general point on top of that is that the technology has enabled remote working. Work from home is starting to be used a little less remote working because work from home implies you're not working a little bit. So there's a little bit of connotation there, but remote working and using that phrasing, the technology that we have is also allowing us to work asynchronously. Before, you always had to be together working with folks on stuff or call them directly and have the same time at the same place. Much of the technology and innovation that we're seeing is also asynchronous work, which allows for a spread of, I'm gonna do my work at 10, they do their work at 11, I come back at noon, and so that's also changing the patterns of behavior of when am I doing my work. I might work 6 to 6, but there's only 8 hours in there that I'm working on, as an example. So the work-life adjustment isn't just I go to work and then I do my life, it's interspersed as well. So I think that could have an interesting impact also on our travel behaviors as we're seeing it, as we're seeing evidence of people doing stuff in the middle of the day. So that's another kind of just tangential effect that we're seeing with those technology enablers. We're experiencing it at our employer as well, so.
Yeah, good. Any other questions or comments, folks? Member Lindeke, you're finished? Any other?
Oh, yeah, I'm finished.
Okay. All right, Member Hanson, Suburban Transit Authority, anything to report out on?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Overall, for these suburban providers through March, the monthly motor vehicle sales tax receipts are overperforming projections by an average of 11.6%. So from a revenue standpoint, that is good news. The suburban providers are working on improving efficiencies by working together. We are discussing, for example, a vehicle parts sharing arrangement as well as knowledge sharing for vehicle types so that lessons learned don't have to be learned multiple times, and we can share that knowledge. MBTA quarterly ridership is up 42% over a year ago. And analysis is being done on route deficiencies and finding ways to reduce unproductive fixed route service in favor of expanded microtransit service. Southwest Transit their on-demand partnership with Lyft that I've mentioned previously has completed about 175 rides, and they're budgeted for up to 1,200 rides. Their prime ridership is consistent at around 500 rides per month. And their midweek express ridership is performing well. Plymouth is preparing for a service change at the end of May. Most of the changes involve reducing express service and reallocating to microtransit. So we're seeing a trend there. And finally, Maple Grove express ridership is peaking on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, while Mondays and Fridays are significantly below that. And their microtransit ridership is rising also. That's my report.
Good. Thank you, Member Hanson. Any questions for Member Hanson? Yes, Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know that there's legislation right now, or there's a lot of work at the Capitol around Lyft and workers' rights and legislation on that. Has there been any thought on how that could impact the transit providers partnering with them on microtransit?
I guess I'm not aware of those discussions. We haven't talked about those.
Okay.
Can you maybe point out some issues that would
So
be
there's,
relevant there?
yeah, sorry, I don't know all the details about it. There's legislation around working conditions about how people's accounts are deactivated, payment, like how drivers with Lyft are being paid and insurance stuff. And I was just wondering if that's I guess it's maybe a bigger question that we don't have to talk about now, but how that legislation would impact
And I
the
can-
transit
I can certainly
providers.
follow up on that and see if there are some implications.
Cool, thank you. I would appreciate that.
Commissioner?
But to that point, that's something Dakota County is watching very closely. We have the first in the country contract with Lyft to provide disability transit service. So rather than having to call Metro Mobility 3 days in advance, individuals can order up rides on time. They can stay at work an extra hour. It has transformed people's lives in having that kind of service available and has since been replicated across the country. The bill's very problematic. Lyft has said that they may even leave the state if it is passed. The minimum rate is higher than what the rate is in Manhattan. Of course, we have considerably lower fuel costs, et cetera, than Manhattan, and it would be devastating to this disability Lyft service in Dakota County.
Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to Member Hansen's report, it was just announced that Southwest Transit has hired a new CEO. So for a long time, it was Mr. Lensimich, who retired last year, but it is Eric Hansen, who will be starting June 5th. So we're looking forward to meeting him and having additional support at Southwest Transit. And also just we were able to have a big milestone both for Southwest Transit and for Green Line Extension, that the bus waiting area at Southwest Transit Station has opened to the public. And if you get a chance, go out there. It is beautiful. So.
Okay. Member Petrick?
I just had a question. Were you able to provide reduced fares for people through your contract, your agreement with Lyft?
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, we pay the going rate, but what was unique in the setting the standard nationwide is that Lyft actually bills the county, and the revenues or the amount paid is a drawdown on the individual's bank account or benefit set, if you will, each month. So they're given a certain amount of money that they can spend. And so with those rates and the risk of actually losing Lyft, it would really curtail the amount of rides and the ability of people to continue using the service like they have.
Thank you. We just had a real increase all of a sudden in the presentation at the council from a selfish point of view, and Hugo being rural, sort of, about Lyft and what options are available. And I was wondering if you were able to do something more directly and more efficiently.
The issue was never the rates. The issue was the ability to make the payment directly from the social services funds as opposed to out of pocket from the individual.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you, Member Petrick. Anything else on this topic? All right. Thanks, Member Hansen. Now we'll turn to Chair Jeni Hager from the TAC and see if she has a TAC report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the bulk of my report is with our agenda items through the agenda today, which is quite long. And so I'll just apologize in advance. I have a hard stop at 2:30. I didn't want to leave without letting you all know. TAC Vice Chair Brian Isaacson will be coming and picking up in the event that discussion items are not yet complete.
Okay, good. Thanks. Stand by here. We'll get back to you in a moment. I looked at my notes here and thought I was also going to report out to you on the Expo. Maybe some of you are keeping up to speed on that. The decision on, there are 5 finalists for the World's Fair, essentially, now called the Expo. If it comes to the United States, it's coming to Bloomington, Minnesota. And Bloomington is one of the finalists, along with, I think it's, there's Serbia, there's a city in Argentina. The main competition appears to be Malaga, Spain. So it's going to be between Malaga, Spain, and Bloomington. And they'll make the decision in Paris at whatever convening body they have for these expos on the 21st of June. So if it comes to the United States and it comes to Minnesota and it comes to Bloomington, it's going to have about a $2.4 billion estimated economic impact. So stay tuned on that. That should be pretty interesting. And then I also attended the first ever Cities of the Americas Summit. The State Department has decided cities are where the action is relative to people and government. And the whole Western Hemisphere was there. There were about 250 mayors in Denver from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, North America. So I was part of a U.S. Conference of Mayors team that was there, and that was really quite fascinating. And more about that at some other point in time. But let's go now to the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Anderson? Second.
Is that Lewis?
Second, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We got a motion and second to approve the minutes of April 19, 2023. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving those minutes as published, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Now we'll bring Chair Hager back up to go through the consent agenda items and then also take us into the action items that we have. Chair, welcome back up. And the first one you got a couple of streamlined amendments for us, I think.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have two streamlined TIP amendments today on the consent agenda. The first one is 2023-28 for a series of new projects to add into the TIP. The first is a traffic study for a recently completed reconstruction project along Highway 316 in Dakota County. It's a MnDOT project. And the second is to add 17 new projects recently selected as part of the 2022 regional solicitation. The 17 projects are programmed for fiscal year 2024, which actually begins July 1 of 2023. So these projects will show up in the 2024 to 2027 TIP. However, the 2024 to 27 TIP won't be approved until later this year. So introducing these projects in the current TIP helps ensure that there's no time-sensitive amendments or delays for project sponsors as they work to deliver their projects.
Any questions on that first matter, 2023-28? Okay. Yeah, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, not a question, but there's a typo in the detail of the projects on page 5, item number 6. The heading lists that project as being in Anoka County, and it's actually a Dakota County project. It's correct within the box, but not on the header.
Tell us again where that is.
Page 5. The number 6, it says Anoka County, 140th Street
Gotcha.
pedestrian bridge. It's actually a Dakota County project, so.
Thank you for that.
Just a little typo.
Okay. Other questions, comments with regard to this matter? All right, then why don't we just take 29, discuss 29, then we'll take them in a single motion.
Okay. 2023-29 is a request by Metro Transit to increase the cost of its bus and rail fare collection equipment project. To cover the cost increases, funds are being shifted from a project for bus purchases. Demand for new buses is much lower than anticipated. There's no funding from the regional solicitation here, so it's just a swapping from one project to another.
Any questions on 29? All right, do we have a motion to approve 28 and 29?
So moved.
As amended.
All right, we got a motion and a second.
Second, Martinson.
They go with the.
Moving,
Just as
Commissioner
amended.
Holberg, second, Member Martinson.
What's your?
28 and 29, any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of action transmittals 2023-28 and 2023-29, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, into the non-consent portion of the agenda, and the first one there is 2023-20, which is a scope change for Hennepin County. Chair Hager.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2023-20, a scope change for Hennepin County project, a reconstruction on Lowry Avenue Northeast. The requested scope change removes the improvements at the intersection of Highway 65, which is Central Avenue Northeast, and Lowry Avenue. These improvements will instead be constructed by Metro Transit when the F-Line ABRT project is constructed. The change is a result of close coordination between agencies and minimizes impact to the public due to construction activities. The requested scope change is unlikely to have changed how the project ranked overall when it was awarded as part of the 2018 regional solicitation. TAC unanimously recommended approval of the scope change And following recent actions, TAC did not recommend any reduction in federal funds as all improvements will be completed with the other project.
Okay. Any members have any questions on 2023-20 on that scope change? So to summarize it, the project will be done in conjunction with Line F ABRT.
I'm sorry, say that, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Is that the project then you eliminate the Minnesota 65 intersection project? It'll be done in conjunction with
the F-line
with
project.
the ABRT project?
That's
Line
correct,
F.
Mr. Chair. Yep.
Okay. I'll pull this closer. All right. Is there a motion to adopt 2023-20?
Move approval. Anderson.
Anderson, thank you, Commissioner. Second?
Second.
Second. Member Johnson. All right. We got a motion and a second on 2023-20. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of 2023-20, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And now on to 2023-21, which is a potential release for public comment for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP. Chair Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2023-2021, TAC recommends approval of the HSIP application for release for public review and comment. The period would be from May 19th to June 23rd. The revised package will return to TAB for approval after the comment period. MnDOT staff recommended 12 changes and updates to the packet from the previous solicitation. One of those updates is recommended to be removed by TAC. TAC recommends striking the following sentence from page 8 of the packet. The sentence is, to meet the intent of HSIP, we want to ensure agencies are selecting projects with the greatest safety benefits rather than responding to public or political pressure. TAC's reasoning is that the reality is that public and or political input is another data point that should be considered in projects that are put forward. So the recommended motion for TAB is that the Transportation Advisory Board approve the draft 2024 Highway Safety Improvement Program application for release for public comment with the changes to the 2022 HSIP application as described below.
Question for Chair Hager on 2023-21. Is there a member of the TAB who cares to make the recommended motion on the screen?
So moved.
Member Anderson moves. Mayor Bailey seconds the adoption of 2023-21 as recommended on the screen. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the recommended motion as shown, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. On to 2023-22.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This transmittal action item is with respect to the regional solicitation, weighting of criteria and measures. The recommended motion is that the Transportation Advisory Board approve the weighting of the criteria and measures for the 2024 regional solicitation with the following adjustments from 2022. Adding 100 points to safety-related criteria for all application categories except transit expansion and transit modernization, and distribution of the additional 100 points based on current measure weighting within the safety criterion in the roadway categories, except in bridges, with 50 points going to the National Bridge Inventory Condition and 50 points going to multimodal elements and existing conditions. The recommendation would add more points to quantitative measures, and consistent with discussions to this point, TAC feels that adding the 100 points moves towards elevating safety in the regional solicitation while avoiding a large swing that is not yet informed by a more in-depth analysis and thoughtful approach that TAC looks forward to for the 2026 regional solicitation. TAC has deferred to the recommendation from the Transit Technical Work Group, which prefers to maintain the transit applications as is and does not see an issue with having these applications have a lower total point value at 1,100 points than those with the additional 100 points, which would have a total point value of 1,200 points.
Based on the conversations we've had over the past few months, I thought this might generate some discussion. Possibly not. You know, we've been heading in that direction of emphasis on safety, but if there are members that have questions for Chair Hager with regard to the conversation at TAC, or she's certainly willing to answer those questions. Anybody have any questions? No, interesting. Okay, is there a motion to adopt 2023-22 as shown on the screen in the form of the recommended motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Karwowski moves.
Anderson.
And Commissioner Anderson seconds. All right. Any further discussion?
I have one point.
Yes, comment.
There may be a typo. I might have read it wrong, but it's under the heading on page 1, federal program review, there's a reference of 4 federal programs, and then only 3 of them are named. So I think it's actually 3. Under the IIJA, I'm not sure, but.
Elaine?
I think, and one of them may have been mislisting, is the carbon reduction. It's part of IIJA, but we don't know if it's going to be considered in the funding or not, so that's probably why it was mislisting.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm all for adding points to safety and focusing on safety here. We've been talking about that for months, years, if you will. What I don't like is that it's just coming out of every other category to make it work, and it effectively dilutes everything else, which includes we're lowering the value of equity on this by doing it this way. So we're de-emphasizing equity in favor of safety. It also puts some categories from the 4% down to 3% weight, roughly speaking. We've had analysis by staff before. Getting below 4% means that that scoring criteria is basically moot to the end result of the projects. So we have staff from all the applicants doing work for a measure that effectively won't really help them win points, or it's a very minimal number of points. I'm a little disappointed that we only have one option in front of us today, as far as we're gonna add points and dilute everything else. We talked about that diluting a couple months ago was gonna create this problem. So again, I'm all for emphasizing safety, but I don't think that we did the proper analysis of where those points really should come from for each of these categories. And I think the answer is different for each of these categories of where those points should come from, because each of these categories are different in what they do and where the most points are available. So, you know, in general, again, I'm all for safety, but I don't think we should do it at all costs from everything else. And it lowers basically the value of every other applicant category here. So that's.
Chair Hager, yeah, thanks for those comments, Member Geisler. This was a little bit about what I was expecting in terms of conversation. Chair Hager, would you comment on that relative to I'm sure you had a similar conversation at the TAC.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Geisler. I think I would agree with you, and I think much of the technical committee members would agree with you. And given the timeline that we were on for the 2024 solicitation, we didn't feel there was going to be time to actually have those conversations and actually reach agreement on where the points should come from, which is why we noted in our report that we do look forward to a more in-depth and thoughtful analysis and approach with the 2026 rewrite.
Member Geisler.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand that, but I think making a rash decision is not necessarily always the good decision. But we understand that we want to emphasize safety, so I think we just need to understand that if we're emphasizing safety at the cost of every other measure in every category except transit. Also, transit doesn't measure safety, as we had a discussion on Monday about that in our warm-up meeting. But there's no change in the transit area. Transit safety has been a topic of discussion. I won't belabor that, but there is a metric here to say, should this come from absolutely every area or not? I also, at the end of the day, we really shouldn't be looking at the points. We should be looking at the percentage weighting. They could be out of 10,000 points. The point total doesn't matter. It's the weights. It's the percentages of each category is really what we're deciding. So 100 points, 500 points, whatever, the percentage is what matters. So just because it's doing it to do it and taking it all the way across because we're just trying to meet one measure, but also dropping other measures that we know we're working on to put in the 2050 TPP doesn't sit well with me. So I don't like it as it sits. I probably won't be voting for this today just from that purpose, but I do think we need to emphasize safety. So it's kind of not a great solution to do that, but it does get there.
Yeah, I think the time, it was time sensitive is what I hear you saying with respect to 2024. So you made, you used a meat axe instead of a scalpel, if you will. So would you talk about that a little bit more, or tell us how much time do we have in case we wanted to tackle this problem and try to solve it for 2024 as well?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I might ask Steve for some help on timeline, but the package will go out for public review and comment. We'll come back to TAB probably in July for final approval. And then Met Council staff will need to put everything together and release the package for applicants to be able to put applications together and have that process complete by the end of this year so that we can start the scoring and selection process for next year. So we knew it was a tight timeline from the get-go. And we knew one of the biggest challenges would be deciding if we were going to take points from other categories, what those categories would be, and how to reach agreement on those.
Okay. And it would seem to me that when you release it to go to the public, you want to release it in a form where it's not going to get modified when it comes back, because then the public really wouldn't have had a chance to comment on the modified form before it has to be implemented. So, or voted on. So this is a conundrum a bit because Member Geisler is raising points that have been raised here in prior months. Important points. So what do we do? This is the best course of action for 2024 and we fix it for 2026. Is that the consensus the TAC reached?
Mr. Chair, committee members, this is the recommendation from the Technical Advisory Committee, yes.
Yeah. Other comment? Yeah, Member Holland said.
Yeah, I just want to say, let's take the example of a roundabout, which might get some safety points for a application. But if you're a pedestrian and you're riding a bus and that stops at that intersection and there's a roundabout, I'm not sure that increases safety for the rider of the bus who has to get on foot and navigate the roundabout. So I'm going to vote against this because I don't fully understand why transit is completely excluded. Maybe it's a mental block on my part, but I'm going to vote against it.
Let's ask Chair Hager to comment on that regarding the exclusion for transit.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the transit working group did recommend that the transit categories remain as is. However, if the TAB did want to add points to transit expansion and transit modernization, they did provide a recommendation for where those points would go. They have a heavy focus on adding points to ridership because getting people out of their single occupant vehicles and onto transit is a safety measure in and of itself, with additional points added to multimodal elements, which is addressing those connections with our most vulnerable users on the street. So they did discuss if there was a desire to also increase the points in those two transit categories, how to do that.
Thank you. I'm still going to vote against it, but thank you for that.
Yeah. Other members? Okay, we've got a TAC recommendation. Member Geisler has raised. Oh, yes, Member Martinson.
So at last month's meeting, we were presented with another option that included an addition of 300 points, not 100 points. And we discussed that the 100-point addition would be shifting the emphasis on safety by increasing it by 6 to 8%, about 7%. And that a 300-point addition would shift it by something about 17%, between 15 and 20. We haven't discussed that further. It wasn't brought back. The recommendation from TAC on a policy issue here is 100 points. That's what we're voting on. I wanted further discussion about 300-point addition. I believe Commissioner Gattel tried to get a vote on it last month, but we didn't have an action item on the agenda, so I will not be voting in favor of this today on those grounds.
Other questions, comments? We got a recommendation from the Technical Advisory Committee on how to deal with this interim problem, I'll call it, for 2024 with respect to the allocation of 100 points to safety. And it does have an impact on these other categories. So we've got a recommended motion on the screen on 2023-22. Let's see if someone wants to make that motion and get a second. We can have a little bit more conversation and we can decide if.
It's already on the table.
You already did.
They already.
Oh, yeah, we were in discussion. We were already in discussion. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right, any further conversation on this? Thanks for that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
You know, good points made by others, but I do think the further study can address in more meaningful ways. So this is a modest step to address safety. Any delay, we would never really properly address it in the confine, but if a larger group studies this later, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I think there's no question we can do a more in-depth analysis for 2026.
Yeah.
So, all right, we've got a motion and a second. Thanks for that. And any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of, maybe we better do this by hand vote. All those in favor of adoption of 2023-22, raise your hand, please. Okay. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks for that good discussion. All right, Chair Hager, on to 2023-23.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is for the 2024 regional solicitation, minimum and maximum federal awards. The recommended motion is that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt no changes to the minimum and maximum federal funding amounts for the 2024 regional solicitation and to revisit the issue going into the 2026 regional solicitation. TAC did discuss that the next solicitation is expected to be around $250 million before overprogramming or other additional sources such as PROTECT funding. TAC also questioned whether increasing the maximum was about inflation or a larger policy and values question around the number of funded projects versus funding larger projects. Ultimately, the group felt more discussion is warranted for the 2026 rewrite.
All right. Question for Chair Hager. On 2023-23, is there a motion to adopt 2023-23?
Question.
Go ahead, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member Geisler.
Ms. Hager, have we ever discussed looking at the percentage of maximum federal award in the technical committees? I know I brought it up a couple times over the years, but have the technical committees, funding and programming, whoever, looked at the versus the 80% cap and lowering that at any point in time?
Mr. Chair, board members, I'm unsure if funding and programming looked at that this go around. And in the past, I might call a friend. Okay.
I don't think so.
Member Koski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. It seems that taking a closer look at the issues of 2026 rewrite does make sense. However, taking action now to raise the maximums of a couple of key funding categories seems prudent. Over the last several meetings, and even here today, this board has discussed ways to elevate safety in the regional solicitation, and two ways to effectively do that are with roadway reconstruction and modernization and safe routes to school projects. When a roadway is reconstructed and modernized, the designs are created to address known safety concerns, upgrade pedestrian facilities for ADA compliance, and pursue current best practices in design to implement a truly multimodal and safer streets for all users. Roadway reconstruction and modernization currently has a federal funding maximum of $7 million. That has not been raised since 2014, while nearly half of the projects applied for in this category in 2022 requested the full amount, and 11 projects significantly overmatched the federal funding. Reconstructing a roadway is expensive. We recently raised the federal funding maximum for strategic capacity projects due to the cost of those projects. Those high costs are not unique to strategic capacity projects, and inflation is affecting local agencies' ability to deliver on those important roadway projects, which deliver direct safety benefits. Additionally, safe routes to school projects, like pedestrian facilities and multi-use trails and bicycle facilities, focuses safety benefits on our most vulnerable users of the system, and in this case, our youngest users of the system. It makes sense to align the federal funding maximum of safe routes to school with that of the pedestrian facilities category and further elevate the importance of focus on safety in the regional solicitation. So I would like to make a motion to raise the maximum award amounts for roadway reconstruction modernization to $10 million, and then safe routes to school to $2 million, and request that the discussion of federal funding minimums and maximums be revisited as a part of the 2026 rewrite.
Would you pull that microphone a little bit closer and restate your motion, please?
All right, I'd like to make a motion to raise the maximum award amounts for roadway reconstruction modernization to 10 million, safe routes to school to 2 million, and request that the discussion of federal funding minimums and maximums be revisited as part of the 2026 rewrite.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second, Lindeke.
Member Lindeke seconds. Let's go into discussion. Commissioner?
I wholly oppose that. I think we should keep the funding maximum awards the same as our last cycle. It'll fund more projects. It'll benefit more representation in this room. I think to make a motion to raise them now and really not vet this with a lot more time, I support the motion that was presented by tax staff. I just don't think we should change the maximum. We'll do less projects. I think to do more projects will help more people in this room.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Geisler?
Thanks, Chair. Abacus time. The reason why I bring up the percentages of the cap is that in roadway modernization, 67% of the projects that were funded last year hit the 80% cap. They did not hit the hard cap of their projects. So 2/3 of the projects in roadways in general, 78% of the projects in roadways last year hit the percentage cap, not the hard dollar cap. Across the entire solicitation, all categories, across every application that we have, 72% of the projects hit their 80% cap first. They didn't hit the hard dollar cap. So the fact that inflation is impacting the cost of some projects, there are definitely some areas where we have had very high cost projects that are feeling some pinch. But across the region, 3/4 of the region is hitting the 80% cap, not the hard dollar cap. So raising the hard dollar cap won't actually address the problem for the region. It may address some point areas. So I would be against raising any of the hard caps, and matter of fact, I would ask that we lower from the 80 to the 70% personally, because I think that would actually fund potentially 6 to 7 more projects across the whole solicitation looking at last year's numbers. It does push a little bit more down to the localities, but I think the localities need to think about, can they support that many projects? We talk a lot about regional balance. We get balance by doing more projects. We talk about getting more things done. Specifically bike ped, multi-use, there's tons of projects that went unfunded, even with all the additional money we had. If we lower the 80% to 70%, more money can get done. We would have an additional 2 to 3 projects in bike ped last year if we lowered it from 80 to 70% and left the hard caps as they are. So personally, I would be against changing any of the hard caps, and I would rather see us visit the percentages. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Geisler. Chair Hager, let me come back to you and ask what kind of a conversation you had at the TAC around these issues, roadway, or the maximum and also the safe routes to schools.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, tax conversation was more around the big picture question of whether we were addressing inflation by asking the question of whether we should raise any maximums, or delving into a broader conversation around policy and values in terms of funding more projects versus bigger projects. And getting stymied there, the group opted to recommend no change for the next solicitation.
And this is something that you thought you could study more in depth for 2026?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the group felt that more conversation is warranted. Inflation is a real challenge. I think Member Geisler brings up some good points about some data that wasn't at our fingertips to have the conversation right now in terms of number of projects that are applied for in each category, which projects are significantly overmatching the federal funds, or what changes to things like the federal maximum in terms of percent might do for project sponsors, overall funding packages, and the distribution of projects across the region. So without that data at our fingertips, the group did not delve into that conversation.
Okay. Elaine, did you want to say something? Okay, all right. I thought I detected, just from working with you for a couple of years, that you wanted to say something. Remember Jalali?
Well, on the Safe Routes to School proposal, I'm understanding the motion for increasing the maximums as not having to spend the maximum, just creating a higher allowable amount. And I don't necessarily see the drawback of that generally, and I would be supportive of doing that for the Safe Routes to School, given the population that's trying to support. So I actually just wanted to make a point that I don't necessarily see the problem if we're not, if all we're doing is saying this is the max that could be allocated. I just wanted to express that to the group.
Member Lindeke?
Yeah, just my thought about is just ignoring inflation is just silly. It's obvious to all of us that its costs have gone way, way, way up. And not having changed the maximum for reconstruction projects, which are, as Councilmember Koski points out, very expensive, since 2014 is, I don't know, that we should be raising that. Their costs are, you all know costs are very high. So, and those projects specifically are ones where you see the greatest safety benefits for our most vulnerable people. There's so many examples in St. Paul that I can think of right now where reconstructions are saving lives, and so I just think this is something we should do, given the conversation about safety we've just had.
All right, thank you, Member Lindeke. Member Foster?
I think,
Go ahead.
great. So I really appreciate Member Geisler's comments around the percentages and not the cash amounts. That I'm learning a lot about that, so thank you. I want to speak to supporting this one. When we've talked on the tab a lot about roadway safety, pedestrian vehicles, bike safety, and I think increasing the maximums is a sign to agencies that this is a priority. So even if the maximums are never hit, it does show the values of TAB and what we should be moving to. So, thank you. I'm done, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. I saw you contemplating it. I thought maybe you wanted to do a little bit of add-on. Mayor Winchell, and then Commissioner Holberg, and then Commissioner Karwoski.
Mr. Chair, members, didn't we have this conversation at the last meeting? And I know we talked about the e-board about whether or not we should raise some of these. And I thought what came out of the last meeting is that we weren't going to raise any of the things. So that's why I'm kind of confused why we're re-debating this, because I thought it happened at the last meeting that we were going to stay. And then we talked, remember we talked about at the e-board about raising them. We had some numbers in there, and we talked about, well, if we're talking safety, let's do the Safe Route to School, a couple of these other ones, but it never went anywhere, and we said we were just gonna leave it. So I think that's why, and then that was TAC's recommendation initially. So I guess, I thought we kinda hashed this a little bit at the last meeting, and we decided to leave it there. I mean, we had conversation, but I don't think it went any further, and I think that's why this is back on the floor today as leaving the same. I don't know. That's what I remember, not
Okay.
sure.
Thanks, Mayor. Commissioner Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions. My recollection of the discussion is that in increasing the amounts, we talked about a number of categories that hadn't been increased since 2014. So in addition to road construction, safe routes to schools, it was bridges, and there were at least one or two others. I'd be interested in what, and then for the maker of the motion, what's the rationale if we're raising amounts, only picking two and not treating all the categories that haven't been raised since 2014 as the same?
All right, let's go to the first question. And I think Steve Peterson from our staff is going to be able to help a little bit on this issue. And Chair Hager, but I'll go to Chair Hager first. Chair, did you want to defer to Mr. Peterson?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, this was the complicating factor that we've changed them along the way here. But the categories that have not changed, safe routes to school, bridges, roadway reconstruction, transit expansion, transit modernization. Yeah, there's Elaine, maybe multi-use trails. And that's the last page of the action item. There's a rather colorful table. Right, that
You had the four, correct, or five.
yeah. So the analysis that you had asked last time, Tab asked for additional analysis, and that's what we put in the report. Some of which, roadway reconstruction, the reason I think we talked about that even at TAC funding and programming is because those projects are, 7 million they're getting overmatched in the order of, several million more than the 7 million. So especially those urban reconstructions are getting really expensive. Safe routes to school, I'm guessing that the reason that's coming up, $1 million, there's some agencies that are saying $1 million, they're not gonna federalize their project and go through all the federal process, sounds funny, but for $1 million, it's almost no longer worth it to federalize a bunch of projects for $1 million. So I think that's maybe the two reasons those came up at the technical work groups, and there's the additional categories I mentioned, but those two in particular seem like they were maybe ripe for change.
Yeah.
And then the maker of the motion, you respond to the second question, please?
Yeah, I can just add on to that. I mean, there is another option here to increase all categories, but was also just trying to think of the most, the ones that we were, I feel like, contemplating the most as a board that we've been talking about, but, and thinking of what we could have the most impact on this year, too.
Commissioner, any further inquiry?
No,
Okay.
I was just
I'll go to
trying to
Commissioner-
understand the rationale if.
Commissioner
why some
Karwoski, and
not
then
others.
back to member Geisler.
Elaine might have wanted to tip you off to something.
Pardon me?
I don't want to interrupt, that's pertinent.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a note, our notes on page 2. The staff did an analysis just looking at the last solicitation of how many submitted per category that reached the maximum. And for example, the bridge category, there was only 1 out of the 5 applications that requested the maximum of 7 million. And even on the multi-use trails, only 8 of 49 requested. So that was how they looked at, not a lot of some of those categories were requesting that maximum.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recall the conversation last meeting is similar to Mayor Winchittle described. We had a lot of conversation and we kind of gave staff direction, so now we're gonna revisit this and try to solve it today. Again, Member Geisler mentioned lowering the percent. Well, that means all the local, whether it's a city or a county, would have to contribute more money to their selected project. Raising the max creates less projects. I don't think we're gonna solve it today, and the interesting thing, I've been involved with a lot of legislative activities. There's no doubt more money is gonna be put into transportation, which might more properly address a lot of these things that we can't even factor in. So we're suggesting a change that really may be overridden or major affected by all this new funding that will get passed in the transportation bill. I think to sit back and go by tax recommendation would be the prudent thing, because I know in the transportation bill, there's a lot of extra money for TAB as part of that. So we'll see what gets passed. But that's a big new wave of money and emphasis on, I know there's safe schools money. So I think to be a little bit, to be making changes now, I just think we almost have to marry what we do moving forward with the new legislative and transportation bill. So I'm against the motion for the original TAC recommendation.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Member Geisler, then Member Barber, then Member Anderson.
I got 2 candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If this recommendation would have been in place last year, we would have lost 3 projects in modernization. Those 3 projects would have kind of come out of Scott, Carver, and Dakota. All of the new monies that would have gone into Hennepin and Ramsey. None of the collar counties would have received additional funding. This would just invest deeper in the urban core for roads, just to be clear. So I think it's important to see, you know, what are these changes are. To the question about inflation, yeah, inflation's a real thing. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, are federal dollars meant to be 80% of the projects that people are asking to do? Or are they meant to be seed money to get it, and local, whatever that local agency is, should be paying for a large portion of the project? You want to talk about some of its strategic capacity is frequently at 50% federal match. Most of those projects are 30, 40, $50 million. They're not even coming close to the 80% cap. So I do think that, yeah, inflation's a real thing, but the question is, how are these federal dollars really there to fund everything? Or are they there to provide the majority or a good portion of the funding? But local match is always going to be present here. 80% is the highest we go. But yeah, to the point of fewer projects, we would have lost 3 modernization projects in the collar counties if this this recommendation for was in place last year, just by eating up all the money. And so to Member Jalali's question, increasing the caps results in larger projects. Larger projects eat up the money, which then those smaller projects don't get a chance because the funding line comes faster. We see that in bike ped, or the multi-use trails, quite a bit with the $5.5 million, eating up those couple really big projects. They are highly utilized, so they score really well. And they're always at the top of the funding line, which really cuts down on most of those applications are in about the $1 million, $2 million range. They're half of what the cap is, but the big projects eat up all the money. So to my point about lowering from 80 to 70, yes, it does put a little bit more onus on the locals. However, it does provide more federal seed money to more areas and more projects, which is something we have discussed as an objective. We've waffled on it back and forth. We haven't moved it, but as it stands, I think this would actually be detrimental to the regional approach that we're trying to take.
Okay. I missed, thank you, Member Geisler. I missed Member Dugan. He was in here before Member Barber. So, Dugan.
Wish to go first, member. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate Councilmember Koski's and Councilmember.
Could you pull your microphone a little bit closer, Peter?
Councilmember Foster's observations. I'm not concerned, but we have to decide, and I'm not sure we can do it today in 2026. Are we going to fund like Denver for one? I know there's been peer studies done of RMPO versus others. Funding, I think, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 or 5 major projects that make big impact, like we did with the ABRT. Or are we going to do more of the seed money, as Member Geisler pointed out? We have to come up with that, what is almost, I hate to say like a mission statement, but, what are we trying to do? Is it seed money? And then, or is it more projects? And if it's, if we change the percentage, do we not need to speak with our city, county partners first, agency partners, can you afford this? Is this just going to put it out of your reach? And so I'm not sure we could come up with that today. And it's going to be a major policy question, which, in my opinion, which way we go. A little for a lot, or a couple of major ones.
And you would rather defer that discussion to the 2026 solicitation as opposed to this one?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes, but I do appreciate Ms. Foster and Ms. Koski.
No, it's a good discussion.
Yeah.
Member Barber, and then I think it's Commissioner Anderson.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at this, when I'm really glad, number one, that we're having the conversation. So thank you for making the motion to have this discussion. I do have concerns when we're looking at just 2 categories, because it does sort of fundamentally shift a lot of things without our looking at it holistically. And I think that to both Member Foster's comments of this represents our values, and Councilmember Karaski's that we don't know the whole landscape right now because there's a lot changing potentially at the legislature, that making this change right now may not make sense for this current solicitation. Clearly, it's a conversation we need to have for the real revisioning for the 2026. Both how, because what we decide here does represent the values that TAB as a board and sort of the regional approach is bringing to the table of how we fund projects. But picking a couple, my fear is could tip things in ways that we don't intend without taking that big step back and looking at it from a broader perspective.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Being the first time sitting at this table, I appreciate the discussion and the insights. I think I agree with Mr. Karwoski. The impact of the upcoming legislation is going to have a major impact on what the scope of, what is coming before us in the future. We don't know what that's going to be. I don't think that we are going to see less money coming at us. And because inflation is definitely a thing that we need to take into account, I think I would be cautiously in favor of larger amounts, revisiting future categories, the bridges categories, for example, at a later date. But we know that there's going to be these increased costs coming at us, but we're also going to have a lot more money coming at us to help supplement many of these projects. So I think, looking back at projects that might have been lost isn't necessarily the right lens to look at it for right now, because looking ahead, there's going to be a lot more resources, money coming into TAB from legislation, presumably, that I think are going to cover inflation costs as well as our ability to do more projects. So at this point, I think I'm in favor of this, but I do want to make sure that we have the capacity to look at this again in the future as well. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Hollinshead, Member Martinson, and Commissioner Holberg.
Well, I just want to agree with those who have said we need to look at this holistically. So rather than increasing the caps on a couple of categories, I think we should indeed step back and take a comprehensive look. And I also am very aware that we are entering a different regime as far as state matching money, local money is concerned. So I think I'm against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Member
Chair.
Hollinshead. Member Martinson?
No, I had nothing.
No. Member, Commissioner?
Yeah, so just real briefly, I think the ramifications of not knowing what's being passed in St. Paul is really detrimental to good decision-making at this point, given that this is a draft going out for public comment, and by the time the comments come back, we will know what happens in the legislature. We can still reserve the right to make some of these changes before the final solicitation goes out at the end of the year. And so, I'm not going to support the motion to change it today, but I certainly would want to reserve the right that once we see what the landscape looks like, to make changes before we put the final solicitation criteria out there, and invite our partners in the process of reacting to the draft to incorporate the new funding wherever it lands into their comments, and we may hear from our partners a clear level of support for modifications prior to putting out the final plan.
Okay. Yeah, our track is potential final approval in July to the point you're making, is that legislature should be over this week, we hope. Thanks. All right.
Not shaking your head.
Member Schimber?
Just great debate. Most of the debate is about what we should do in the future. I would say that we need to marry the changes in the funding levels with the scoring that we talked about earlier and bring the two together at one time, which would be in the 2026 Because we're starting to move all the peas under all the shells right now. And I think we should look at it much more holistically. How are we scoring it? And what are we funding and at what levels? And bring it back to this board at one time and say, are we happy with that? Is it doing what we want it to do? So scoring and funding.
Thank you, Member Schimber. Any further conversation with regard to Member Koski's motion? Okay, let's do this by hand vote too.
Restate the motion, Mr. Chairman?
Pardon me?
Can we go ahead and restate the motion for everybody? That's right there, though, or let everybody know?
Yeah, so.
I just want to make sure nobody's confused.
Yeah, Member Koski, would you concur that what's on the screen is essentially the key elements of your motion?
Yeah, so the motion is to increase the maximums.
Could you pull the microphone over, please?
The motion is to increase the maximums for roadway reconstruction and modernization from 7 million to 10 million, increase the maximum for safe routes to school from 1 million to 2 million, and then to also revisit a maximum again next cycle, so for 2026.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. This is all related to the 2024 regional solicitation. All right, motions on the screens. I think everybody can see it. Member Koski's restated the motion. Let's do it by hand vote. All those in favor of adoption of Member Koski's motions, raise your hand. Nine? Okay. Those opposed? Motion fails. All right, the staff recommended and the TAC recommended motion on action transmittal 2023 is before you, which was to adopt the maximum and minimum federal funding amounts for the 2024 regional solicitation. Basically, stay the course on this 2024 solicitation. Great debate on this issue. So is there someone who cares to make that motion?
Mr. Chair.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Karwoski moves, Member Geisler seconds. The adoption of action transmittal 2023-23 in its proposed form, which is to adopt the minimum and maximum federal funding amounts for the 2024 regional solicitation, consistent with what we did in the past. All right, any further discussion on that? All those in favor of adoption of that motion say, well, maybe we should go with the hand vote again. Hand vote. All those in favor, raise your hands, please.
Oh, it's everyone.
Opposed? Carries. All right. 2023-23, as recommended by staff and the TAC, is approved. All right. Great discussion here, folks. Now we're on the mode splits. 2023-24.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the board, the recommended motion for this item, which refers to the 2024 regional solicitation mode splits, is that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt no changes to the modal funding ranges for the 2024 regional solicitation. These ranges do not consider the impact of the carbon reduction program, although we can assume that the ranges would be inclusive of PROTECT funding. The funding going toward on-system bridges is not anticipated to continue beyond the current federal transportation bill. Regardless of these ranges, they are guides and they can be changed by tab in response to any additional funding sources that come forward, the quality or the quantity of applications received.
Chair, questions for Chair Hager? Member Geisler.
Just to be clear, so we're approving the ranges, not necessarily the midpoints, but the fact that roadways would get 46 to 65% based on the funding scenarios we would review at a later date.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right. Is there a member of the tab that cares to make the recommended motion on the screen? Mayor Winchell moves. Is there a second?
Second, Jepson.
Member Petrick. To 2023-24 that's on the screen, the recommended motion is that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt no changes to the modal funding ranges for the 2024 regional solicitation. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yep, member
May I
DeGan.
ask you, on-system bridges, what is that, exactly is that name?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, is additional funding that was specific to bridges. So if you recall, the bridge program many years ago went away, and this board chose to fund a range of dollars out of the surface transportation program to bridges. This is additional funding on top of that, dedicated to bridges.
Okay, thank you. May I follow up, Mr. Chair? From what source, ma'am?
Steve, can
Because it was mentioned that that funding may be going away. That's all. I was just trying to clarify.
Mr. Peterson?
Sure. Yeah, in the packet, we called it on-system bridges, meaning on the federal aid system.
Okay.
In IIJA, the money that produced those projects was a general fund transfer. So what we're hearing from MnDOT is we cannot assume that that money is going to continue. In the same way that we think carbon reduction is going to continue, protect SDP and CMAQ, on-system bridges at this point, MnDOT's not assuming will continue into the future.
May I follow?
Yes, go ahead, follow on.
And Mr. Peterson, is that because it's general funding? Is that, as opposed to specific, earmarking, if you will?
Correct, yeah. It was because the money that was derived from it was a general fund transfer, so they can't assume that will happen again for future transportation bills, although it might. And so that's why it's good to still have a bridge category in there, but we're not assuming the funding at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
For this next solicitation, we'll be selecting projects for the years 2028 through 2029, and IIJA sunsets before that, so we don't know what will be in the next bill.
Thank you, Ms. Kasuga.
Other questions, comments on this particular motion? All right, we've got a motion and a second on 2023-24. It is that the tab adopt no changes to the modal funding ranges for the 2024 regional solicitation. All those in favor of adoption of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. On to 2023-25. Policies, qualifying criteria, and eligibility. Chair Hager.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, 2023-2025 is with respect to the 2024 regional solicitation policies, qualifying criteria, and project eligibility. There are three parts to the recommended motion before you. The first is that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt the other attached policies, qualifying criteria, and project eligibility for the 2024 regional solicitation, including use of tiebreaker option number 2, with the provision that an applicant with two tied projects in the same category can break the tie themselves, and that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt retention of the $32 million bus rapid transit federal maximum rule, and that the Transportation Advisory Board adopt a qualifying requirement that operators of a facility confirm with a checkbox that they will remove snow and ice for year-round bicycle and pedestrian use for any bicycle or pedestrian facility, including those on roadway projects. And Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm happy to talk about tax discussion on any of these.
Yeah, this has some real interesting elements to it. So members, thoughts? Member Geisler, lead us off.
Ms. Hager, just a question about the snow and ice. My understanding is that that applies to all projects, not just bike ped projects. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that is correct. And after tax recommendation on this, it was discovered that this already did exist within the roadway applications themselves, and a minor tweak was all that was needed to bring it in alignment with tax recommendation.
So in effect, this is saying everybody has to deal with snow and ice, no matter if they're getting federal dollars.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right, Member Martinson.
So to that same point, on page 5 of the document 2023-25, there's a statement, multi-use trails and bicycle facility projects only. All applications must still include a letter from the operator of the facility confirming that they will remove snow and ice for year-round bicycle and pedestrian use. But it strikes me that we have roadway facilities and bridge facilities, et cetera, that get funded out of these monies that also have bike and ped facilities on them. So it feels like we should have them they should be required to provide letters as well. It doesn't, this feels like just for the bike and ped trails only feels like, well, why are they being asked to do that? but other places that also have these facilities aren't being asked. It feels inconsistent to me.
Chair Hager.
Mr. Chair, Member Martinson, TAC did talk about that requirement. So in the multi-use trails and bicycle facilities, a letter is required. The initial motion out of TAC was to have a letter with respect to these other categories. And TAC members talked about how we're doing our very best to streamline these applications, make it easier and less costly for applicants to put these together. And rather than having another letter that needs to be created, do this with the checkbox, I would anticipate with the 2026 rewrite, or if this board chose to do it now, this could be cleaned up so that it's consistently a checkbox across all application categories.
Elaine.
Part of the difference in with this category, the multi-use trails, we have applicants that are not cities and counties. For example, Three Rivers Park Board. So they are applying for the funding, but they themselves do not do any maintenance and expect that the city would do it. So this covers having those applicants provide that letter. If it's a city applying, it's easy for them to attach that letter. But when it's a roadway project and the city's applying, by checking that box, they're saying they're going to do it. So to then add a letter from themselves to their application. Part of it was because the trails applications were coming from other entities who are not a city or a county.
And as I recall, we've seen that problem surface after the fact in the past, where there was a debate between units of government as to who was going to maintain the trail system through a particular town.
Greenway, currently.
Yeah, well.
Midtown, Greenway.
So this will help us solve that problem in the long run.
So
Member Martinson.
I understand the logic of that and the problem underlying it. And so maybe to make this more, even reduce the burden further, would be to say for applicant, to make it further restricted, not just for multi-use trails and bicycle facility projects only, but those that are specifically not proposed by either a city or a county entity. Would that be an acceptable modification to that?
We've had, just to give you a personal experience, we were the missing link in Edina in the regional trail system with Three Rivers. And the project got built through Edina, and then the debate started as to who was going to maintain it, Edina or Three Rivers. But we've worked it out over time, but so even the language you suggested doesn't capture that and solve that problem, because I think this broader language would be the one that would be what we'd want to see here. Member Geisler.
Thanks, Chair. I would also just add, it's also about transit here. If we're building transit lines that aren't being plowed and cleared, that riders can't use them, the Metro Transit builds some stuff, then the counties or cities are responsible for them. It's not just bike ped where we have this problem. So, I mean, arguably we have the problem on roads too, but there's a pretty established road management plan for that. But I do think, sidewalks and areas around transit, plus the trails, all of this is interrelated. So it's really just non-motorized or other versions that we need to get this covered with. So whether it's a letter, whether it's a checkbox, at the end of the day, I think the other item we discussed was there are no teeth for us to say they didn't do it, now what? So other than public pressure and peer view. But we can set this qualifying criteria, but we can't enforce anything with it. So I think that's another worthwhile point of don't belabor the qualifying criteria too deeply.
Member Hollinshead.
Yeah, on Monday at the info meeting, I made this point, I think. I like the idea that on future solicitations with the same applicant, if they haven't maintained what was funded before, there should be some consequences. That's within our power, I think, in defining the solicitation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hollinshead. I'm just thinking about that one. Elaine?
Right now, there are consequences if a user asks for enforcement because it would not follow the ADA guidelines. So a city or a county could be sued if they're not cleared. So that is the consequence.
Member Foster, were you trying to decide if you had a question or not?
I was.
Go ahead.
I don't want to drag this out, but I do have a question about that. Does that, if an agency received funding for a project through the regional solicitation and sidewalks, pathways are not cleared, they could be sued for that, like, for not doing that? Has that happened before? I'd be interested in that.
That I don't know.
Okay.
But it follows under the ADA requirements also, and there are places that have been sued for not being accessible. So we could probably do some research on that.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a follow-up? What happens if it's unclear who, okay, so Metro Transit, when it comes to clearing sidewalks, the guidelines are they maintain some of the shelters and stops, but not all of them. Then it usually falls on wherever the sidewalk is, so small business, individual homeowner. When it's unclear on who is responsible for clearing the sidewalk, what would the situation be there? And if this isn't a conversation for now, I am cool with pushing it on. This is new info to me, so I want more around this.
Member Barber may have an answer for you.
There's not a perfect answer because as Member Foster mentioned, there are multiple entities responsible for different bus stops and different bus infrastructure and transit infrastructure, some of which is ours, some of which is county, some of which is city, some of which is business owners, some of which is locals, really depends. And so I think it's, and part of this conversation is the policy part related to projects that receive federal funding, and part of it's operations of Metro Transit. They're very different conversations. But there is a lot of confusion about who does what with some of these things. So I think we just want to be careful to keep the two things separate because it gets very complicated. We do know it's an issue, and but also when it goes to, are there going to be repercussions if who's going out to police if somebody did, or clear this particular sidewalk or this, and what would those implications be? Some of those conversations have me a little concerned about how that would be handled. If there's monitoring for repercussions down the road for federal funding or something like that.
Okay. Again?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair. At the Monday Citizen Member warm-up info meeting, I think that the point that Member Foster was making, Member Barber and Member Holland had, was very clear that the facilities, particularly I'd say with the transit, are not maintained, seem to be not maintained from snow and ice as they should be to enhance the safety and of the ridership. Whereas we've done it in the park system. If you get the money to put a trail in, you got to keep it clean so people can use it. But I would just ask that, as we go forward, with the 2026 rewrite, that we have an emphasis on, public transit or any facility now that it's been brought in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. To the conversation Member Martinson started, let's look at that in 2026 and see if we have a broader sort of application for it. Member Hollinshead.
Yeah, I think that depending upon litigation for consequences, we know what state the courts are in and the backup after the pandemic and short-staffed, and that may be temporary, but in our society, we value due process to an extent that I don't think litigation is going to provide the consequences for lack of maintenance that we would wish here, given the amount of money that we invest and decide on in these projects. So I know that, I know that a lot of local bus stops, for instance, in my city, St. Paul, I think there's an ordinance requires private homeowners to shovel their sidewalks. I don't know if it requires businesses at a busy corner where there's a bus stop to be responsible for clearing that sidewalk. But there must be some way we could work through this and decide how to incorporate responsibility and make it a consequence in the next round. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Member Hollinshead. Mayor?
I think
most cities have ordinances that it's X amount of hours. We put up there, they just must remove it. They could remove it in March. They did their job, but they forgot about January and February. I mean, if you really look at it that way. So you might have to put something more in there that says, at what period of time does it have to be cleared out? Maybe it's 48 hours, 24 hours, because, you know, it just depends on the snowfall about how quick sometimes some folks can get there. I don't know, just an observation, listening to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. Others? Okay. So we started asking questions here. I don't think we have a motion yet, as I recall. Is there a member of the tab that wishes to move 2023-25 in its recommended form?
So moved.
Member Anderson moves.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Member Lushnick seconds. Any further discussion? I was just sitting here thinking about an old mayor we had in Edina who would say, "Oh, hey, Schember seconds and this and this," you know, whether you wanted to second it or not, just to keep things moving. So, actually, I stalled things out a little bit there. So we got a motion and a second, and no further discussion, I understand. All right, all those in favor of adoption of 2023-25 in its recommended form on the screen, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we're on to 26. 2023-26, Chair Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This action transmittal is with respect to the 2024 regional solicitation measures and scoring criteria. The recommended motion is that the Transportation Advisory Board approve the measures and scoring guidance for the 2024 regional solicitation with the changes described below. Using 2022 transit ridership data instead of 2019, clarifying that a Safe Routes to School project does not have to be a MnDOT-sponsored project, and allowing bridge rehabilitation or replacement projects on minor collectors and above in urban areas and major collectors and above in rural areas, and amending Criteria 1, Measure A, in the bridges application, which is about the role in the regional transportation system and economy, such that applicants can measure to the nearest federally eligible parallel route in that criteria, or that measure.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn to Member Martinson, who sent in some thoughts that he had on unique projects, and ask him to discuss that for us.
Thank you, Chair. So this was based on discussion that happened in TAB exec meeting last month about the unique projects, and also prior conversation we'd had in the TAB as a whole. And my experience with applying for federal grants to the National Institutes of Health, where the criteria that one has to apply to are somewhat different. And my recognition, the main point that I wanted to make in my proposed edits was, I think that the evaluation criteria to be communicated clearly to applicants, what we're seeking as the TAB. I think that the emphasis on innovation as the point doesn't help the applicants very much, and it actually causes more problems. And so what I did in trying to just redo the language was to say instead what we should be doing is asking them to speak first to the significance of the project. And the significance of the project can be demonstrated in a number of ways. It can be based on the project's scalability, that it's a pilot of something that has been demonstrated to work in one location or population being expanded to another location or population. It can be that we're doing something innovative that hasn't been done before. The point is that I think what we're trying to do is get people to be solving problems that we haven't solved before, not necessarily just innovating for innovation's sake, because an innovation that doesn't help us solve a problem, it's not that useful. So I just tried to provide some other language and then kind of subsumed the innovation point underneath the significance point, moved around where we're asking them to discuss what they're proposing. I also propose something that I'm not wedded to, which is this whole sort of table of the criteria, measures, and the points for that, because at the time I proposed it, I thought that it was a good idea to make this scoring process look more like the scoring process for all of the other categories. Subsequent conversations with staff have made me realize that that's probably counterproductive. So if you look at that table, of where I have sort of the criteria and measures and then the percent of the total and then max points, just strike that whole right-hand column off of that. And then just talk about the measures, the criteria, and the percent, the weighting that we would give those. And then there's a couple ways that we could do the scoring within those categories. So the current category, or the current scoring system that was used in the last round is basically a 5-point Likert scale. And that didn't really provide adequate variance for people to be able to distinguish, partly because I think reviewers have a tendency not to use endpoints of these kinds of scales, in my experience. And so what I was proposing was an alternative that would use, and I don't have the document here, but I did look it up. So NIH uses a 9-point set of criteria, and they do additional craziness where they actually they score it like a golf score, where you want to get a low score instead of a high score. So, but their 9 points fall into sort of exceptional, outstanding, excellent, very good, good, satisfactory, fair, marginal, and poor. And then you can break those into either a high, a medium, or a low score. And the idea of that is to try to get reviewers in that context to use a fuller range of sort of, how you rate a given project. So I would propose that, but with a reverse scoring of how NIH does it as a 9-point scale. I'm not wedded to that either, honestly. My bigger point was just to focus more on significance, less on quote-unquote innovation. So that's...
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for undertaking that effort. Yeah, I think the last few solicitations we've had, this lofty goal of finding something that was unique and innovative and cutting edge in the transportation world that we could help out on. I think several years ago we did the project in St. Paul on Our Car. Was it Our Car? Yeah, and gave them a significant amount of money to assist in that project, that electrification project. And so I think what Member Martinson has done is made a real good attempt to get away from the broad sort of sweeping idea. Well, you bring us an idea that you think is innovative. You bring us an idea that you think is unique, and we'll see if it is or not, and caused us to think about, with his guidance here, the idea that maybe we should concentrate on some particular aspect, like we've talked a lot about safety. How about greenhouse gas reduction? What about, what if we said, just by way of illustration and not nomination in any way, but what if we said we were going to set aside a certain amount of money? We've been setting aside about $4 million. If we don't see something unique, we put it back into the solicitation. What if we said, oh, okay, we're going to buy 1,000 electric bikes, and we're going to set up a bike rental system, or to try to get this greenhouse gas down. So we come up with an idea instead of a concept of something that we'd like people to explore in ways they could maximize their thinking on what might be beneficial to the region in a particular category, like greenhouse gas reduction. So I don't know if that's a helpful sort of explanation or not, or direction, but I thought it might stimulate, and I think Member Martinson has done a good job of setting the stage for a potentially stimulating conversation. Now, Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that it was our first swing, I'm not super keen on changing right away, because we just finally got people to start looking at this. The 6 criteria and the 15 measures were generated by tab members sitting down and then working out the weighting as a group over multiple meetings. It wasn't just slapdash. We did come up with those things through a lot of discussion. I wholly agree that we could provide better guidance to applicants. No contest there. But I think the weighting is part of it. As far as the scale goes, these are very qualitative in nature. They are very hard to score anyway. And it is, frankly, personal preference. We also had some scorers who just either provided the 5s or 1s or didn't participate in the scoring or generally provided qualitative responses as well. I think that's something that we can improve on personally as scorers, since we had tab members scoring. Because staff wasn't comfortable doing it. That's why the people who built it scored it. So I have concerns about, again, making an abrupt change on a brand new category that we really had the first go around with. I know I've had some conversations with people in my local area who didn't even know it existed last time, and so they're still catching up to the changes because not everybody is as big and following it. So I would hesitate to make big shifts here for the first year. Let it go a second round. We've got to see really what the feedback is. But I do agree that we should provide better guidance of what we expect in those 6 criteria to applicants.
Use the intellectual stimulation that Member Martinson's provided to think about it in terms of 2026.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. Commissioner.
And, Mr. Chair, I agree with that, but I think only having the 5-point range is problematic, and applying the 9 points, with running from excellent to poor, would pull out the differences between projects more than just having 5 points. So I don't know if if you would resist that change, but the only 5 points, everybody was stacked up the same. There was very little differentiation between applicants, and that was a problem.
Mr. Chair, I actually would be in favor of a 10-point, but let me say why. I think we need a 0. Okay. 0 to 9, because there were some applications we had that didn't address topics. And so I think the ability to say you didn't do it, it's a 0, is important. But other than that, I agree, spreading the scale out does make it easier.
And that could be part of the 2026 conversation.
Sure.
What you're both saying, I think.
No, I'm saying that for this next round,
for
we
this next
should
round.
use the 10 points instead of the 5, with 0 being you didn't do your homework and you didn't even, get into the ballpark, and then the stratification from poor to excellent
Thanks
on
for that
9
clarification,
steps.
Commissioner. And both of you, and then I'll go to Commissioner Karwoski and then down the line to Member Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Hovland. Commissioner Holberg stole my thunder. I served on that scoring committee, and because it was only 1 through 5, we had a tie, and it was not broad enough. So I'd go 0 through 10. Maybe there's a perfect one, but 0 through 9, it doesn't matter. But I think we can implement that. It doesn't change the solicitation. It just makes the scoring better. I think Commissioner Geisler makes a great point about it was our first solicitation with that. Let's let it see what comes next. But Chair Hovland, your ideal in 26, I think we should look at that direction or some guidance on what unique means and all that. But I think it's a broader thing for 26. Let's see what the second solicitation.
Okay, so you like that 10-point scoring system for 24?
For sure. It's even like a swing voter, and I took a lot of wrath because it was.
Could you be a little bit more enthusiastic about it? Okay. Member Johnson, bear with me. I think Member Barber had her hand up first, according to Elaine, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to kind of split the difference here a little bit. I do like having a bigger scale, not quite as complicated as what was proposed in here, because it is us scoring it. So I do agree it was hard on a 1 to 5 scale. That said, even if we keep the language of being innovative, I do like the language that has been proposed by Member Martinson, talking about the project significance and how it can be scaled, and approaches emerging challenges. When we actually were talking about the scores, those are the sort of things we were talking about. And so it really seemed to get there, because one of the things that really came out clearly in our discussions about this is we all had different definitions of what innovation was. And so I really kind of like the language that proposed here. I think we can still work the word innovative in somewhere without having it be a problem, but I think that people were all over the map as to what that actually meant. And so a little more clarification, that Member Martinson has put here. Thank you for putting this together so we could have a good conversation about it. And then adding a little more to the scale, not quite this complicated because it is us scoring it, I think is a good idea.
So you favor the editing that Member Martinson has done on the evaluation criteria plus some modified 5-point scale, or what was that? Was that unclear?
I agree, it should be more than five. Because I don't think we want to end up with a tie again. So even a 10-point or something like that, that you can get some of the nuances of the differences in there.
All right, okay. Let's hear what Member Johnson has to say, and then Member Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Some of this is not going to cover new ground on this, which is maybe ironic for the unique categories one, but I certainly agree with expanding it from 5 points. I mean, again, the tie, I think, was a sign that this wasn't quite working as intended. So I think broadening that scoring, whatever the exact number is, just to get more gradation. And I think the other tendency is, this is a room full of Minnesotans who don't want to put to the extremes. They always are going to be in the middle, so everything is going to be 2, 3, 4. So I think that's going to be really important to expand that. And the other thing, and this was the last time around was my first regional solicitation, and the unique projects category was on there. And I remember there being conversations with, well, it's not innovative as kind of a disqualifier as one of the conversation topics. And I thought it was really strange because I was like, it's not the innovative category, it's the unique category. And for my sort of, new vision on what this was, didn't have experience with it, unique just means it doesn't fall in the other categories. It was just different enough that it didn't fall into that. So I think it was probably, again, I don't want to assume what applicants were thinking, but, I read that and didn't understand what it was about at all when I read that. So I think, again, I don't want to make huge changes, but I think the scoring range change, I think tweaking the language to make sure that, if it's not someone's definition of innovative, it's disqualified is probably a really important tweak to make to this as well. So I would endorse the change in the language as well.
Thank you. Member Foster?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have less strong feelings about the scale. I think a 10-point range or 9-point would be great. I really like the language, though. I think unique, the same thing for me. Unique just meant you couldn't find a place for it in any of the other categories, so this is one where you would throw it. I think encouraging cities, counties to think about what it actually means to make a change that isn't just not another category is what we really need on tab when it comes to regional balance, when it comes to climate change. That's what we're looking for here, is something that could actually impact that beyond what exists now. So I really like this language. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Member Martinson and then Member Malushnik.
So first to the issue of the scale. So I understand Member Geisler's preference to have a 0 category, although I think we can handle that by how NIH does it, basically. If you submit an application to NIH that's not responsive, they tell you it's not responsive. You don't get scored at all. You don't even make it to the scoring part. And I think we could handle it that way. Keep the 9-point scale, because the 9-point scale is nice because it's an odd number. You don't have a midpoint for people to pick, and people will tend to pick midpoints if they're given midpoints. It's kind of a truism of survey research. So I would prefer to keep the 9-point scale and then have a non-responsive category to go with it. To the question of the innovation driving someone away from applying to it, at NIH and in all the grant writing and reviewing that I did over decades, I saw that requirement of speaking to the innovation of a project wind up with a lot of things not getting funded that really would have produced good science. But somebody on the review committee weaponized that word and then used it to kill projects that they said they didn't like. So that's partly why, it's personal experience of having stuff go off the rails because it wasn't quote unquote innovative enough, because it was supposed to be innovative, even though there was important science that would have been done had it been funded. And then you can speak to the significance of it. And if you're doing something innovative, then boy, that should be part of your significant statement, right? So just the further logic for why. Oh, and then the other thing, last point, is to say, what's unique? And I think that was to Member Johnson's point and Member Foster's point too. For example, something that we do in this category is the travel behavior inventory, right? Nothing unique about that at this point at all, but highly significant as a source of data that we can't get in any other way. And so we didn't even question it last time around. We just said, well, of course, we're going to fund this. Now let's discuss the ones that we're less certain about. So anyway, just further.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that, those thoughts. Member Geisler, coming full circle.
Yeah, and just to color in a little bit more on the innovation and why that even showed up in the first place. The reason why we were looking at that, we were trying to find, the money's available in a 4-year time frame normally. We set it aside so it's on a 2-year timeline so that it would be a little closer to meeting the needs of right now. Instead of 4 years from now you'll get your money. Well, 4 years from now, what's going on? If we would have given you money in 2019 and then you got your money in 2023, boy, the world looked a whole lot different there. But that was why we pulled it up there. And innovation was really meant to be very broad, of like bringing new ideas to the region. They might not be totally brand new, right? There's tons of stuff that other regions have done that we've just never done. So it was meant to be wide. I do agree that we didn't get that message across. No challenges there. I think if we want to use new language for it, that's fine. What I worry about is the weighting between the categories, if they're all equal or not. We chose to say new ideas to the area, whatever they are, be it an old idea tried here for the first time or a new idea in a new version. That was the most important to us, followed by environmental. That was the kind of step down of where it was with finally being, public-private partnership as the bottom tier of what we valued. If they're all equal, that kind of dissolves that, so I think the weighting of those criteria becomes important, what those measures are, then is the more, how the rubber meets the road, if you will. So I do think, again, I'm all for more language, more clarification. We could call it something other than innovation, but I think the essence of what we were trying to get across, we should go back to those work sessions. We had hours and hours of discussion about what we wanted, hours and hours of deciding the weighting and surveys and stuff. So I think we should build upon that with Martinson's input here. I think we absolutely can make this better. But I just don't want to lose the weighting that we drove.
Mr. Martinson, Member Martinson, hold on to that thought, because I've got a couple of people that were ahead of you, Member Malushnik and Member Jepson.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My memory never serves me at this great age that I've obtained, but I think it was 14 or 16 years ago when we first came up with this unique project idea. I questioned whether we ever needed it. It's never, not against the projects, but it's never really served the region as I would like to have it done this. Although I feel that the commissioner, that you, Mr. Kessler, you're moving in the right direction. I really like what Mr. Martinson said today. Maybe unique is the wrong word, innovation might be the right word, but certainly our car and nothing, but it certainly hasn't done what they said it was going to do. My personal opinion, didn't serve the folks in the poverty area that it was supposed to serve, in my opinion anyway. So I think we need some change. I don't like changing things for 26. I think the scoring could certainly change a little bit, but some of your ideas about, reducing carbon and those kinds of things, I think we need to give a little more clarification, and let's get our money in for the whole region, or what we value back for what we want to do, because now I think in the last 14 years, we haven't really gained that much from this category. So
yeah, so thanks for those thoughts. So I hear you saying you're comfortable with the language changes that Member Martinson recommended in the scoring discussion, but put your big concentration on 2026.
Yeah, it's when we do things too quick, you've got all these people out there doing these projects and all these local governments and folks, and when you change the gears too fast, it costs everybody money and time and things like that. That's the perspective that, being a local government guy most of the time, that's been my experience anyway. Okay. So
thank you, Member Malushik, Member Jepson, and then Member Jalali, then back to Member Martinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not in support of a lot of the policy changes that have been brought up today, and therefore have voted that way. But Member Martinson's recommendation is actually coming from the perspective of the applicant and making it more clear for the applicant. And being on the scoring committee and being part of those meetings was incredibly frustrating because those scores were so close. So anything we can do to make it to better communicate what we're looking for from the applicant's perspective, I am 100% in favor of, as well as the added range of scoring numbers, 0 to 9, 1 to 10, whatever. I think that is very valuable in the scoring to show the weight a little bit more clearly to the applicant, because the decision we made based on a tied score, I know that there was some real frustration from the applicant who wasn't funded, and we need to prevent that as often as possible.
Thank you. Member Jepson. Member Jalali?
I was just going to re-up the point that I appreciate Member Martinson's recommendation, because I think it's important to put out some clarification of what we consider innovative so that it addresses the issue that he brought up of people using that term without more clarification of what it means to just use moving goalposts to basically like invalidate projects that actually are offering something that is worthwhile and worth considering. So I know we're still settling how we all feel about it, but I think there's a lot of value in the proposal, and I wanted to speak specifically why I like it. I think that we need to flesh out that language more, and I see the proposal as doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Back to Member Martinson.
So, thank you, Chair. So just to this is a clarification basically for Member Geisler. So I did not want to do any violence to the weighting, because I recognize the work that went into that weighting, and that was not my intent. And if that didn't get communicated clearly, I apologize. So in the second column of the table that I provided, so each of the categories, so you have significance, where you can talk about originality if that's part of your project, or scalability, or extension of an approach. That's 40%. So that's still the highest scoring, the highest weighted category. So whatever number you would give to that category is going to get multiplied by 0.4 in determining the final score, right? So then environmental impacts is 20%, which I think is very close to what had been there before. So still the second most important weight. And then racial equity is 18%, and then multimodal communities is 13%, and partnerships is 10%. And I think I made a couple of changes on those that were basically just to make them round. So, and I'm not wedded to that either. So I didn't try to change the weighting, because I think the weighting, I thought the weighting was useful the way it was. So just to clarify.
Thank you for that. Member Dugan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As always, great discussion. As Member Maluchnik said, going back like 2014 and like, to Ms. Foster and of course Mr. Johnson, the unique was kind of a catch-all. TBI was one of them. Okay, what are we going to do with this? And then our car pushed us in that direction, which should be innovative or unique. I think I really like what's been presented here, but I think the emphasis has to be on innovative, however we define that. And unique is probably not the right word, because as I recall from that work group and other discussions, we were really looking for people to be, off the chart type, kind of an Elon Musk, and that's why we went to 2-year funding, because how quickly things changed. And 4 years, you're dead in the water. I mean, Chat AP, Mr. Martinson, please help me, Chat APT, the artificial intelligence, will change us in 5 years like we've never seen before. So I think we really need to have the emphasis on letting people dream, let them innovate. Existing problems, yes, but I think the emphasis may be more on emerging problems, things that we can start to see, but we haven't addressed yet. And I also think we have to have the guts to not fund anything if it doesn't work. That would have been my preference last. I didn't think any of the projects merited funding on innovation, so I would have just put the money back. That's what we were supposed to be doing, rather than saying, "Oh, damn it, we got to fund it." And I didn't want to get into that. Anyway, and I want to compliment Elaine. Why don't you tell us your great innovative idea for the transitway, the U? It's great. I believe it is making the road so that it charges the buses as it goes. I mean, that's okay. Wow. All right. That I'm not sure it addresses equity or it addresses environmental or multimodal, but I just don't want to see us hemmed in by what we see today as a problem when we're missing the picture of, where it's going to be in, 10 years or 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dugan.
So I would like to move,
Member
sorry.
Martinson,
Pulling
yes,
down
thank
the
you.
job here. So I would like to move, and the language that I would like to have changed specifically is under the evaluation criteria to say, are you able to put it up like on screen? So the applicant is asked to describe the project's significance. Significance can be a function of the project's scalability, its originality in taking a new approach to either a long-standing or an emerging challenge, using new approaches to existing or emerging challenges, or, that might be duplicative, or its value as a pilot or demonstration project. Is the project a, quote, proof of concept? Does it extend an approach that has worked in one geographic location or population to another location or population? So I think that speaks, to a number of the concerns that have been raised about the changes in the language. That would be my proposed motion.
And I think the way the staff has prepared the action transmittal on the evaluation criteria, your language is redlined in there, so that would be, it's captured in there, and so we'll be able to have that discussed here momentarily. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second. Second. Does that motion include accepting all the other measures?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Right, and the second does as well. Mr. Lewis, Member Lewis? Yes, it does. All right. So we're adopting the 2024 Regional Solicitation Measures and Scoring Guidance and modifying 2023-26 with respect to what we call unique projects, adopting the language submitted by Member Martinson. That's the motion. We got a motion and a second. We got on to discussion. I'm going to Commissioner Holbert.
Well, just to make sure it also includes the expanded scoring criteria beyond the 5 points. Okay.
Correct. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the action transmittal 2023-26 as described, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, thank you. Another great discussion. And now we're on to 27. And Chair Hager's coming back up to talk about the release for public. Oh.
Nope.
No.
You got the B team.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go on. Brian Isaacson, Ramsey County, Vice Chair of Tech.
Brian, good to have you here. I see it's past the 2:30 hour here.
Yep, and,
And, yeah. Threw me off with that totally different hairdo.
Yeah, it's a giveaway a lot of times.
So go ahead and take 2023-27.
I think the recommended motion here is to take the work that you all have done here and send it out to the public, which is our common practice. What we have here is releasing it for public comment to be released for a 30-day comment period scheduled for May 19th. Nice timing. To June 23rd, after the public comment period, revised draft solicitation will come back to this body in July for approval to be released for solicitation.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner. Where'd the second come from? Member Anderson? Commissioner Holberg moves, Member Anderson seconds the adoption of 2023-27, which releases the regional solicitation for public comment. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we got a little addition on 2023-34, and Brian, were you made aware of that? The little Joe Barbeau's, Joe's back here. We had a little addition from MnDOT, I think, with respect to 2023-34.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This actually hasn't been to tabs or tax, so that's why Brian wasn't expecting to talk about it, because he shouldn't. So this is just a simple release of a $6.4 billion transportation improvement program for public comment, as you do every year. Normally, this would be a very simple item with the black part of this amendment, but I'm going to explain a bit about what the red indicates, and that's with the recent carbon reduction funding, A lot of stuff was happening at MnDOT fairly late in the process, and this is from District 3, that little piece of District 3 that happens to be within our MPO planning area. Within the last several days, a project was selected, and it's really ideal to put it out for the tip of public comment to sort of relieve the prospect of having to have a tip amendment, and when that would be, technically it might not be able to be till November, which kind of could be problematic for the applicants. So what we're requesting is adding the red piece of the motion so that we can put that into the draft tip out for public comment, the project that is shown at the bottom of the slide, and make it a little bit more of a seamless process for that project and for our friends at District 3 at MnDOT.
Questions? Okay.
I'll move approval.
Thank you. All right, we've got a motion second. Who is the seconder? Thank you. On 2023-34, any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the recommended motion on 2023-34, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried? All right, great work, folks. We're a little over, and we've still got some informational items. We can postpone the Transitway Advancement Policy discussion so Charles can, we can hold off his presentation until next month. But we do have to get to the airport, MSP Airport Long-Term Plan and Stakeholder Engagement. We've got Eric Gillis and Dana Nelson with us from the MAC. And good to see you in the elevator over there at the U.S. Bank.
Nice to meet you as well, Mr. Chair. Thankfully, I said nothing incriminating on my way down. Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for your time and thank you for the opportunity to come speak about the long-term plan with MSP. My name is Eric Gillis. I'm the Senior Airport Planner with the MAC. I oversee the planning program for MSP as well as our 6 reliever airports. And today I'm going to give you an update on the MSP long-term plan, the timeline, unveiling the preferred alternative, talking about next steps, and really, the next steps coming back to this committee and others within Met Council for that consistency determination. We started the long-term plan in 2019, going through an exhaustive review of existing conditions of the airport. We went through a robust airfield simulation effort as well as an activity forecast. Flash forward about 18 months, we had a pause due to COVID. But late in 2021, when we rebooted the planning effort, we updated our forecast numbers to reflect our COVID-related impacts, primarily focusing, though, on our facility requirements, so our existing and future needs of the airport, which then fed into our alternatives analysis process that found its way through a robust stakeholder engagement process, and I think we have over 25 public meetings that have been done to date as a part of the alternatives analysis process. And today, on the next couple of slides, I'll go over that preferred alternative. Things that we're working towards today and beyond, we're working on finalizing our long-term plan comprehensive report writing effort. We're going through a project phasing and cost estimation process, as well as airfield simulation for the preferred alternative. Hopefully coming back to this group by the end of the year for that consistency determination. We also have one more public event that will be conducted at Sabathani Community Center in Minneapolis on July 11th. And so with that, the preferred alternative is a culmination of conversations from our stakeholders, including airlines, multiple conversations with airlines, our fixed-based operator, Signature Flight Support, who handles our corporate traffic at the airport, number of MAC internal workshops looking at our alternative, draft alternatives, from the operational side of things, and then also senior leadership. So we're making sure that the plan aligns cohesively with our overall goals and objectives of MAC as an organization. And then that external component through our stakeholder advisory panel, which we had our last stakeholder advisory panel in April. That group has been dismissed. And then, like I said, we have one more public meeting to total 4 public meetings in this process. So the preferred alternative really is a primary focus on terminal. For this go around in the long-term plan, we're looking through 2040, between now and 2040. And coming out of the terminal items is our Federal Inspection Service, or FIS facility. This is where we process our international traffic. That occurs currently at Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. We know that that's a priority we need to carry forward through the long-term plan in both terminals. We also know we need to emphasize additional gating capacity Airlines are changing their aircraft type. They're upgauging, as kind of the term goes. They're bringing larger aircraft into some of their destinations. And so that passenger experience, terminal-centric, and gating capability was our primary focus in this long-term plan. But we know that the airfield is geographically constrained, and so as we expand the terminal footprint, it does have subsequent impacts to our airside. So our aprons, our taxiways, being cognizant of that we're not being overly burdensome to the movement of aircraft. And then also where that terminal expansion occurs, where the additional gating occurs, subsequent landside, or where the vehicle accessibility is, the curb frontage, the parking, all of that needed to be considered as well. And without further ado, the preferred alternative, there's 16 high-level projects on the graphic here. Not going to go into detail on all of them today, but I want the primary focus to be on a few high-level takeaways of the layout. The first one being, we're not proposing any changes to the runway configurations, the runway length, the quantity of the runways. From that airfield simulation that we conducted, we came to the conclusion we don't need to modify that through this long-term plan, or in fact beyond 2040 at this point. Again, the focus of this alternative package is to focus on the passenger experience and the terminal expansion component, which is pretty self-evident. One of the things that I'll start with primarily is project number 9. This is concourse A and B. These two concourses are where we serve our smaller aircraft, the 50-seater. They fly to Brainerd, to Bemidji, Grand Forks. Industry-wide, that trend, or rather that model, is going away. Mainline carriers, and I think Ed Bastian has talked about this recently as well, switching to a slightly larger aircraft for that same destination. The aircraft are getting larger and the performance is getting great, so we can, or they can, provide larger aircraft into those markets with nominal or marginal aircraft performance into those markets. So this project number 9 proposes to close Concourse B and rework our Concourse A to accommodate a larger holdroom space, so where the passengers sit prior to departing in the aircraft, and then also modifying the gate alignments to accommodate the larger aircraft. Moving our way to the left a little bit, project number 5, this is our existing green and gold ramps where we park our vehicles. Those are reaching the end of their useful life. And in a culmination of that, we also know we have a curb frontage issue in front of Terminal 1. So in that project together, reworking our curb frontage to improve that passenger experience when we're reconstructing our green and gold ramps. Also in there, if you see project number 2, this is where our existing Federal Inspection Service, or FIS facility, is at Terminal 1 today. It's undersized for what we need today for international passengers in Terminal 1, and so that will actually move and centralize into the green and gold ramp reconstruction project. So kind of a 3-pronged approach to those projects. Projects 3 and 4, those are concourses E and F. Those are reaching the end of their useful life, and if you notice on the graphic, we're kind of changing the alignment of those as well. This is to improve flexibility of aircraft maneuvering in that bowl area. Right now, there's one taxi lane for ingress and egress of aircraft. This would allow us to have 2 taxi lanes, so we can improve airfield efficiency that way. Project number 16 is that orange dashed line between the 2 terminals. This is actually proposing a sterile connection, sterile corridor for passenger movement between terminals 1 and 2. Right now, if you needed to get between the terminals and you were on the secure side or through the TSA checkpoint, you would have to leave that checkpoint, drive over to the other terminal, and go through security again. This would eliminate all of that, improve that passenger experience, but also improve operational flexibility from a sponsor standpoint. Projects 6 and 7 are tied to each other. Project 7 is actually where our existing fixed-based operator is, again, that corporate traffic. In the long-term plan, determining highest and best use of what this area could look like through that 2040 and potentially beyond. Terminal expansion came to the forefront of MAC priorities, and so project number 6 is to relocate that fixed-based operator to the north side of the airfield. Project number 11 acknowledges some additional cargo growth in the future, an additional sorting facility or additional aircraft parking space to accommodate more or less the e-commerce and alike type growth, because we know, especially from the pandemic, that that's been kind of an evolving topic. And then projects 13, 14, and 15 in the bottom of the graphic, this is acknowledging additional remain overnight or RON parking for aircraft. Again, specifically for Sun Country, we know they're adding additional aircraft into their fleet. So not just specifically them, but all the airlines, where can they park their aircraft on our airfield overnight as opposed to being at one of the gates. So with some additional space for parking for that. And then project number 1 is maybe a little bit closer in terms of near-term desire by the MAC. That's an 11-gate expansion to the south of Terminal 2. This is really carry forward from a previous long-term plan effort. It's already environmentally cleared from that previous long-term plan. So this is memorializing that in continuation, the desire to add those gates to the south. So more in the 5-year time frame. All in all, the plan adds 12 additional gates that we have compared to what we have now between Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. And as I was kind of discussing already how we're going to wrap things up, we're actually going to do an airfield simulation to benchmark the proposed alternative in terms of net improvement and capability of the airfield and benchmark that back to our existing conditions simulation. We're still working through and finalizing prioritization of our projects and cost estimation, as well as our long-term plan report writing. Like I said, we wrapped up our stakeholder advisory panel meeting. We had our 6th one on April 13th, so that group has since been dismissed. And as you can see on the screen, this is my 3rd meeting in front of Met Council to some capacity between committees and subcommittees. And coming back later, after the public comment period happens with our long-term plan comprehensive report writing, which we anticipate that occurring or starting June 21st or sometime near the end of June. That'll last for 60 days. We'll host our Experience MSP number 4 event on July 11th. And then coming back to you all for that consistency determination before the end of the year. Mr. Chair, that's it for my presentation, but maybe putting Member Crimmins on the spot and see if there's anything he wants to add from a MAC standpoint before we take any questions.
Yeah, we like that. Go ahead. Carl, put you on the spot.
I have nothing to add.
All right. Okay. Other questions for Eric? Yeah, Member Hollinshead.
I think when you use the word parking, you're talking mostly about parking aircraft, is that right?
Mr. Chair, members, yes, that is, well, it kind of goes both ways. If I go back to the graphic, projects 13, 14, and 15 are for aircraft parking.
Right.
Vehicular parking is more an emphasis on project number 5, where we have the green and gold vehicle parking ramps that are reaching the end of their useful life.
What would be the parking capacity for vehicles after all of this is done compared to what it is now?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, that number still needs to be determined when we look at where the gate expansion occurs at Terminal 2 versus Terminal 1. We're actually looking at the Terminal 2, and this is tied together, I promise. The hangar or the gate expansion to the south of Terminal 2 is to start enabling our ability to take down concourses E and F. So when we look at phasing of the vehicle parking, the gates really do kind of curtail where the vehicle parking moves to. So the demand will actually fluctuate over the next 20 years in terms of vehicle need.
The reason I'm asking is I'm a transit rep on this body, and I'm interested in maximizing the access, the use of transit to access the airport as opposed to motor vehicles. To what extent does your process address that at all? I don't know. Can you?
Mr. Chair, members, just to clarify your question, are you asking if the demand could fluctuate between multimodal transportation versus the individual vehicle parking
Correct.
at the
Yes.
airport itself? The plan itself acknowledges that all those modes are a part of the mix, and in fact, bike and ped access is a part of our conversation and desire when we work through the green and gold ramp reconstruction. But I don't have a number specifically in front of me to allude to what the demand could be between the two going forward. We look at parking demand as it relates to an estimate, but an estimate is only as good as the estimate written on the paper. Forecasts are often incorrect and fluctuates, and coming out of the pandemic puts a little bit of an interesting spin on that, especially when we look at the habits of the business traveler is still somewhat of an evolving topic.
So you're going to have a July listening session, or what, I'm sorry, what did you say was happening in July?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, so we have a final Experience MSP event. It's actually the number 4, the last one, unveiling this preferred alternative and giving the public an opportunity to comment on the preferred alternative, which is also occurring during our comprehensive long-term plan public comment review period as well.
Very good, thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Member Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good presentation. It's always interesting to see airport updates, either Carl or this outside the terminal. Now, my question might be outside the scope of this, but I'm curious of some insight. So 10 to 20 years ago, there was big talk that we were going to have some new airport down in Farmington, kind of like what Denver did, remote. That whole conversation's really dried up the last 5-10 years. Is there anything to that? Will this meet the needs?
No.
No.
Want to make sure Dakota County was listening.
They were.
Maybe in Rice County.
Oh, okay. No, you don't want it. There's no incentive. No, is there a long-term plan for another airport somewhere?
So,
Major.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, no, that was not considered. I believe you're talking about the dual track process, which I'll say, I do have gray hair, but it does predate me. The long-term plan, though, when we look at airfield capacity, the activity we anticipate through 2040 is actually lower than some of the higher activity level years we've seen in the early 2000s. So we're looking at post-pandemic adjustments in the area of about 510,000 operations by 2040. But if you're talking for perspective, in the early 2000s, we were in the area of about 540,000 operations. And well in that capacity realm, and goes back to the airfield capacity of runway configurations.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Workman, Commissioner.
Well, I don't have as much gray hair as the current speaker. I was there, and the dual track, primarily Representative Osmond from the South Metro area laid booby traps of legislation throughout every aspect of the state statute, including the inability to move a cemetery to build an airport, among other things, and other whimsical things. So I think it died a long time ago.
Yes. Remember
Kolash.
I can, yeah.
It's maybe outside of the presentation, but I'm curious about what is MAC's current status for electrification of the ground operations, your capacity to support expanded electrification of your ground operations going forward?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for that question. That's an emerging topic and something that we're actually coordinating closely with the airlines for. I don't have numbers in front of me at this point, but we are thinking about initiatives to motivate the airlines to move towards more of an electrification model on servicing aircraft.
Were you going to ask a question? No, sir. Okay. All right. I do have a statement when you want to hear from TAB members.
Mr. Gillis, I just want to tell you that I think you ought to be really proud of the work that you've done as a senior planner out there. You know, we're able to tell Member Crimmins every month what a great airport we have, and we know the awards that come in on an international sort of basis. But somebody's got to be planning all these things out, and you ought to be really proud of your effort as a senior planner in regard to all these projects that have unfolded out there. It's nice to see you're going to touch again Concourse E, Concourse F. They're starting to show that traffic wear. But another question for you. I think if memory serves me right, you've got like 19 acres that are undeveloped out there. That's the extent of it. And we keep thinking about, some of us think about expanded air freight. And whether it's coming in from e-commerce or it's medical device stuff moving out of here or coming in. When you talk about project number 11, which is the expanded cargo facilities, what is that anticipating? in terms of an increase in cargo capacity or actual traffic movements?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, first, thank you for the kudos. I'm absolutely humbled, and I really enjoy the position that I'm in, but I am the shepherd of the plan. I am merely the person representing in front of the MAC who, there are a number of other people in our organization, and we also have consultants helping with this long-term plan, so I want to give a tip of the hat to the number of people that have been having their hands in this project, but I'm happy to be up here as the shepherd. To answer your question about the cargo, this project number 11 is a tip of the hat to a 2021 cargo study that was recently completed. It emphasizes e-commerce, or rather the need to accommodate additional cargo facility for that e-commerce portion. But we are targeting in the near term, and it's not yet on our capital improvement plan, but we are looking at revisiting cargo as a whole to study not only the air cargo, but also the sorting facilities that we may have ancillary to potential leakage of trucks and trains and cargo moving to other nearby metropolitan areas. So I would say that's also an emerging topic that I imagine will come forward in the next couple of years.
Okay, good. Thanks, Mr. Gillis. All right, any other questions for Mr. Gillis? All right, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for your patience. Joe has a question. Cool.
Yeah, can I just do a closing thought really quick on this? So I think that as Mr. Gillis said, they're gonna have a public comment period over this summer. So we'll make sure TAB members are aware when it's officially out for public comment in case you all want to review it. But just a note too that staff at the council will be coordinating the action item for approval of this plan sometime probably this fall, I think early fall. And so we'll bring Mac back just to do a quick update, but this is really your overview. So maybe they'll just talk about what they heard in the public comment, and then we'll bring a business item forward that actually starts at TAC planning. That'll come through TAP. So that's why we're here today. You're all going to see an action item related to this sometime a few months later.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that add-on. Thanks, Mr. Gillis. All right, we've got one other thing we have to cover, I guess, with Steve Peterson. That's a IIJA matter. TECT is the acronym. One more.
Sure, and we'll make this.
We got a shot at this one, maybe PROTECT. We can try to use some mnemonic exercise to do this.
Yeah, this is good news. More money coming towards us. This is a federal program promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation. And just today, I want to preview it for you. Next month, you'll have an action item. So more just what is this funding source and how are we approaching it? So MnDOT recently decided to give some of this state formula money to the area transportation partnerships throughout the state, including the Met Council. Similar to carbon reduction, we've got kind of earlier money and later year money, and it's different decision-making will go along with each of those. Here's the money we have available. So next month, you'll be deciding on $14.5 million. That'd be for 2025, 26, and 27. Some of the later year monies will get put into future solicitation, so we don't have to worry about that as much. We'll go talk through these a little bit more next month. It is a trickier funding source because it's only certain elements within projects that promote resiliency, it's like you see on the screen. We have a couple options that are coming to funding and programming tomorrow. Won't go through those in detail, but either paying down over programming in those earlier years or funding new projects. Some of those new projects under consideration are projects in Carver County, Washington, and Hennepin County that are aligned with the program focus and eligibility. So more to come next month, but more, if you do have questions on PROTECT, let Elaine or I know between now and next month. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Steve Peterson? All right.
Just a quick one. Is this is an ongoing or is it a time limited?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This is a ongoing funding source. So similar to carbon reduction, as long as the state continues to give that to local partners, we will continue to see PROTECT money. And so in some of the future years, we've got a specific task in our regional solicitation evaluation as to what's the best use of PROTECT money? How do we get projects that best align with the program? The earlier years, we're aligning we're kind of doing the best we can, I'd say, to use the money.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Hold on a second. Commissioner?
Steve, is the recommendation from TAC to support the 3 projects in those categories out of 12 projects that qualify that meet the resilience?
So, Mr. Chair and members, we'll find out tomorrow. This goes to TAC funding and programming as an action item, where they'll have a variety of options to choose from. That might be one of them. So at this point, it's just an information item through all the committees. Tomorrow starts the action item.
Okay, good. Commissioner, any follow-on?
Well, I just like the philosophy when we get new money and we have projects that qualify that we can support more projects. There was some talk about one project that initially qualified, but then the other 3 projects submitted information that made them qualify. And I'm just trying to paraphrase.
So we'll get to have that conversation next month.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner.
And Mr. Chair, some of this will likely be moving, or at least presented as information to our committees as well, especially transportation. So if there are preferences or things from this body, we would appreciate knowing that. I'm kind of the mindset similar to the carbon reduction funds. It's money coming into the region. If it's something we can distribute in a more timely manner, that probably makes a lot of sense. Because the last thing as a region, we don't want to leave any money on the table when some of these big projects really need some infusion of funding.
And just to follow up, our Washington County project happens to be in Cottage Grove. It's a city project with Mayor Bailey here. So.
Yes, I was just, if I can, Chair, that particular project was right under the cut at the last period, and it's a significant road project expansion within our business park that gets to Highway 61. We have a huge area of our community that's expanding. One of the largest industrial park expansions in the state is going in this area, and we absolutely need another way to get that truck traffic to Highway 61. The current route takes it through some state roundabouts onto Highway 61, and at this full build-out within the next 5 years, those roundabouts fail. And so that's the purpose behind the desire for this expansion that the county and the city and everybody's working towards in that particular area.
All right, well, thanks for practicing that pitch. You can do it again next month.
Yeah.
And Member Barber?
Yeah, one more comment. One of the projects that's also in consideration for the 3 additional projects is a project that we had a lot of conversation about when we awarded the last regional solicitation, which is the project on Highway 5 in Carver County. It's through an area that has a significant water area and floodplain and aquatic habitats, and so there's an opportunity for using some of those funds for this project. And like I said, it is one of the ones that was on the cut this last regional solicitation cycle. So thank you for my Carver County representatives for sticking around.
You and the mayor want to arm wrestle to see who gets the project money?
Which mayor now? We need it over here. You got
several here with me.
Okay.
So
my county rep here, he should be arguing.
we'll call Devin her squad.
I want to thank Mr. Carlson for dressing up for us. You came to the party, but no one was there. You didn't, so you can wait till next month. Mr. Kolash from MPCA, anything quickly you want to add from an agency report standpoint?
We have received a $3 million grant for called the Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant, which we are using with our Climate Action Framework to access federal funding through the EPA for implementation projects to be moving forward. We expect those solicitations from EPA to happen in early 2024. We're also working with Metropolitan Council staff who have received a $1 million award from EPA for the planning grant for the metropolitan area. And we're working with tribal governments who are also accessing that funding to work together as much as possible for all of those planning elements that EPA requires, so we get as much federal funding available to us in 2024.
All right, good. Yeah, thanks for coming in. I know that you got here a little bit late, but that's good to get that update. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner?
Go ahead, Tom.
Mr. Chairman, there is greenhouse gas legislation in the transportation bill. Carver County staff is very concerned that we could get funding to expand a state highway and then still not be able to afford it because of this provision. Can we get staff, technical staff, as the legislature winds down for exactly how that's gonna impact projects?
Okay, thanks for that update. Member Malushnik?
On a sad note, Mr. Chairman, a little over 2 weeks ago, I attended the wake for former U.S. House Transportation Chairman Bud Schuster. And many here, or some in the room, would remember that he was instrumental, along with Mr. Oberstar and Mr. Sabo, in getting the final federal money for Hiawatha Line. And of course, his son was later the chair, Bill, and he was there. And he had some great stories about Minnesota advocates, transportation advocates coming out there, and he wanted me to greet all the advocates for transportation here in Minnesota. So that's why I brought it up.
Thank you
All
for
right?
that. Thank you for that. Yeah, he was
Miss-
instrumental. Member Barber?
Very quickly, so the Transitway
Don't
Advancement.
pitch that Carver County project again.
I'm not.
All right.
I will.
I've gotten, they all heard it, we're good. With the Transitway Advancement Policy, we'll move through the Transportation Committee and the full council, the TPP amendment, before we circle back. So if anyone has any questions, reach out to myself or Director Carlson.
Okay, good. Folks, thanks for your extraordinary patience. I know we're way over time. We stand adjourned.